So this guy Piaget was interested in cognitive development. So again, how the brain works. Okay, he defined cognitive development in 4 stages. Infants, the child begins to interact with the environment. Okay, then they begin to represent the world symbolically. Then they learn rules such as conservation. Conservation means, well, I can tell you what it doesn't mean. That's kind of the easiest way. So a kid who hasn't learned conservation yet, if you give them 2 glasses of water, one skinny and one fat, but the same amount of water in each, they can't tell that that's the same amount. Even if you like literally poured the water from one to the other, they would think they are different. So that's conservation. Okay. And then older, they learn to think about the future. They can think complex, problem solve. So we talked about this a little bit in the part 1. But a lot of this stuff comes from Piaget's work. So you should know that Piaget is interested in cognitive development. And then from the earlier slides, I should be able to kind of link where we are cognitively. Kohlberg was interested in moral development. Okay, so at young ages, you develop morals by punishment and obedience. A little bit older, you get conventional. This is pleasing others, and I mentioned that again in part 1. Good girl, bad boy, bad boy. This is what they're looking for, your approval. And as you get older, you start to realize the value of morality and social contracts. This is how society works. You start to develop your own moral code. Kohlberg would say very few people kind of reached these kind of higher stages of moral development. So you should know Kohlberg is morality, and again, that got referenced in the earlier slides. Erikson was interested more broadly in development. Erikson said we go through these various stages, and each stage you kind of have this conflict. You can go one way or the other, and if you successfully resolve that conflict, you develop this virtue. I think my cursor highlights, but anyway. So the ones I want to point out to you here, the big one I want to point out to you actually is number 5, ego industry versus role confusion. This is teenagers, and again, I feel like I'm repeating myself. I referenced this earlier, but I referenced this earlier. You're trying on different identities. You're trying to figure out who you are. I'm an athlete. I'm a jock. I'm a nerd. I'm a goth. I'm an emo. I don't know what else I may be, but I'm a hard rocker. I'm a country girl. So whatever works. You're trying different things on. What do I want to be? Who am I? Okay. Younger ages. Some interesting ones: autonomy versus shame. So this is when kids are trying to do things on their own. We would encourage them to try to do things on their own, and not shame them out of it. So. You should know Erikson, broadly interested in development. You should probably be aware of ego identity and role confusion as teenagers. Okay. Let's talk briefly about the brain. So if I make a fist, here's my fist, right? So this is my brain. This part would be the reptilian cortex. You can't see me pointing, but I'm pointing at the screen. The reptilian cortex, or the brain stem. This is where your life and death functions are controlled. When your reptilian cortex stops working, is when you die. Okay. The inside here would be the limbic cortex. The limbic cortex processes emotional responses. The limbic cortex stores things, so it creates a beginning and end. So people have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? The limbic system is damaged, so that their story doesn't have a beginning and end. So when they hear like this loud noise, it takes them right back to this traumatizing, war. If they're in, we talk about PTSD often in Vietnam. So people with PTSD often their limbic system is damaged and they have trouble storing events. Neocortex would be this outer part. Evolutionarily, it's the latest part to develop. It's also the latest part to develop as you age. Right? So for most of you, your neocortex is still very much developing. It still very much develops to about age 25, and even then it develops, but really through age 25. This is why you can't rent a car before age 25. This is why you do stupid things. Forgive me, but there's some truth to that. As college students, ages 18 to 25, you don't often, I'm not beasting on you, this is really the brain, you don't often, your neocortex isn't fully developed, so things that seem like a really good idea at the time you may not have fully thought through the consequences. And this is one reason we have problems with binge drinking in college students, because it sounds really fun at the time, and oh, by the way, your peers are approving, and peer approval is still really big developmentally here, but you haven't really thought through the consequences. Your brain just hasn't there yet. So you have I just gave you an excuse for a stupid thing to do. Your brain, your neocortex is not fully developed yet. Okay. We're going to try to knock out youth development in this slides too. So again, a lot of you are going to work with youth. So I want to introduce this concept called positive youth development, and your readings was about this. So historically, we looked at youth development from what we say is a deficit-based approach. Okay, we want to keep kids out of trouble. Kids are bad, let's keep them out of trouble. In the last 20 years, 10 to 20 years, we've switched to what we call a positive youth development approach. And instead of a deficit-based, a positive-based youth development approach says, my goal isn't to keep kids out of trouble. My goal is for kids to thrive, to be successful, and believe they can be contributing members of society and do great things even as teens. Okay, it's positive youth development. Okay, there's a couple approaches to positive youth development. The one I gave you is called developmental assets. Developmental assets are, as you can read, skills, experiences, relationships, behaviors that enable young people to develop into successful and contributing adults to allow them to thrive. Developmental assets are broken up into external things and internal things. So external things in your environment, right? Internal personal characteristics. Okay? You saw there's 40 of them. They're broken down by categories. Okay. When I worked in Arlington, and I hear you doing it, right? So we're all good here. Oh, thanks. Every teen program had to list the assets that they were targeting. And then, I don't know why this is out of order. I had a reason for putting this in order at some point. Oh, because we were talking about kids, and now we're talking about emerging adults. That's why. So ages 18 to 25, just some things to be aware of. This is you, right? You're at your peak physical condition. You have a high activity level. Your brain is more fully developed. You can problem solve. You can test hypothesis. You can strategize. You're just generally amazing and awesome, except for your neocortex is fully developed. Intimate social connections are more important. You're super competitive, and you're also more willing to take risks. And then again, back to the neocortex. And then the last thing I want to mention to you is programming for families. So families have unique demands and issues, and just some things to be aware of. Recognize scheduling concerns and the demands on parents to do multiple things, particularly multiple children. Sometimes we schedule for families who are like, why can't you do this at 4:30 on Tuesdays? Well, I have another kid after work, so be aware of that. Understand culture, and not one size fits all. And the example I often like to talk about here is in Arlington. Okay. Our soccer folks, we get a large Hispanic community. Our youth soccer folks are always like, why don't they play in our soccer leagues? They should be playing in our soccer leagues. This is awful. They're not playing in our soccer leagues. But what was happening is those kids, it was very much more a family event. So we had fields that were, we'd say, community or just drop-in. So we did not schedule games there. They were drop-in. And we put those very intentionally in largely Hispanic, Latino communities. And those would be up like 50 people on them. Kids and adults, so playing as a family. Okay, and then intergenerational programming. So doing a program with kids and adults. Oftentimes we do kids and seniors here, and we get a real benefit for both. Something to consider. Okay. I know that's super fast, but you have the slides, you have the video to rewatch it. You are responsible for this material. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.